Clara stared at the house. It loomed over her, dark and imposing. A shiver ran down her spine. The old Victorian house was her inheritance, a gift from a grandmother she barely knew. She had always lived in the city, in the bustle and anonymity of apartment living. This house, with its overgrown garden and shuttered windows, felt like another world. Clara gripped the silver handle of her suitcase. Despite its ominous presence, the house held a strange allure. Maybe it was the promise of solitude, a chance to escape the noise of her life. Or maybe it was simply the pull of the unknown. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, the crunch of gravel loud in the stillness. The town was small, the people even smaller. Their eyes followed Clara, their whispers like the rustling of dead leaves. "Poor girl," they murmured, shaking their heads. "Doesn't know what she's in for." They spoke of her grandmother, of shadows and whispers, of a darkness that clung to the house. Clara dismissed their warnings, attributing them to small-town superstition. These people had always feared what they didn't understand. She, however, was a woman of reason, a pragmatist. Ghosts and shadows held no power over logic and facts. Nightfall brought an unsettling chill to the house. The silence was thick, heavy, broken only by the creaking of the floorboards beneath Clara's feet. Shadows danced in the corners of her vision, twisting and contorting in the flickering candlelight. Whispers, faint and indistinct, seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. They swirled around her, pronouncements of dread in some forgotten language. Clara pressed her hands to her ears, trying to block out the sound, the growing sense of unease. The attic was a cavern of dust and cobwebs. A single window cast a pale, anemic light into the gloom, illuminating a large, ornate mirror at the far end of the room. It was a beautiful piece, the frame intricately carved with scenes of mythical creatures and swirling vines. Clara approached it, drawn by a force she couldn't quite name. As she stood before it, her reflection seemed to waver, to distort. It wasn't her own fear that she saw reflected back at her, but something colder, something ancient and malevolent. The townspeople's stories came back to her in fragments. They spoke of her grandmother, a once vibrant woman who had become reclusive, haunted by something in the house. They spoke of her descent into madness, her claims of a presence trapped within the mirror. Clara's grandmother had died in the house, alone and forgotten. Her death, ruled a suicide, was shrouded in whispers and speculation. Had her grandmother truly taken her own life, or had something else, something sinister, driven her to it? The whispers grew stronger, more insistent. They seemed to know her name, to taunt her with half-uttered threats and promises. Clara's dreams became plagued by visions of the mirror, its surface rippling like a disturbed pond. Fear, cold and clammy, took root in her gut. She tried to rationalize it, to tell herself it was just the house settling, the wind whistling through the cracks. But deep down she knew the truth. The house was not just old, it was hungry, and it had tasted her fear. The attic beckoned her. She couldn't explain the pull, the morbid curiosity that drew her back to that dusty, forgotten space. It was as if the house itself was guiding her, leading her towards some inevitable conclusion. The mirror awaited her, its surface gleaming in the moonlight that streamed through the grimy windowpane. This time, there was no mistaking the malice in its depths. It watched her, its gaze hungry, possessive. Section 8. Facing the darkness. Clara knew, with chilling certainty, that whatever haunted this house resided within the mirror. She felt its pull, a seductive whisper that promised knowledge and power. But at what cost? She had a choice to make: flee the house, abandon it to its darkness, or confront the entity that held it captive. Fear warred with a strange sense of responsibility, a need to end the cycle of terror that had plagued her family for generations. Section 9. Trapped in the reflection. Clara reached out, her fingers brushing against the cool glass. The surface rippled, her reflection dissolving into a swirling vortex of shadows. The whispers intensified, becoming a chorus of screams that seemed to tear at her sanity. Then, silence. The mirror was still, its surface reflecting nothing but the empty room. Clara was gone, vanished without a trace, swallowed whole by the darkness that resided within the glass. Section 10. The silence remains. The house stood silent, the air thick with an unnatural stillness. The whispers were gone, the shadows stilled. The only sound was the creaking of the floorboards as the house settled back into itself, its hunger momentarily satiated. But the silence was a lie. It was the silence of a predator that had just finished feeding. The silence of a hunter patiently awaiting its next prey. Section 11. The mirror waits. In the attic, the mirror gleamed. Its surface was clear, reflecting nothing but the empty room. But beneath the surface, deep within its cold, unblinking gaze, something stirred. It had tasted fear, had fed on Clara's terror, and it was hungry for more. The house remained, a silent sentinel against the dying light. It awaited the next unsuspecting soul, the next curious visitor who dared to cross its threshold. And the mirror waited patiently, malevolently, for its chance to claim another victim.